Hello again. As you know, I am Eli the Computer Guy. Today's class is Introduction to Servers. So most people, when they first start learning about servers, they normally go through some kind of certification track or they take a class that is very specific on servers. Like I started out with the MCSE, the Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer track. So when I learned servers, all I really learned was Microsoft servers. They talked about Mac servers, like a little bit. They talked almost nothing about Linux. They put Novell in there because they had to. But they didn't teach us about servers in general. They taught us very specifically about Windows servers and Windows servers only. Well, as we are going into this server track, I want to give you a broader foundation on understanding how servers work. So in this class today, we are going to talk about a couple specific products, but we're going to talk more about the general idea of servers, what servers do in the network, what they provide to the clients on the network, and things that you need to think about if you're thinking about installing or if you have to maintain a server. So today's class on Introduction to Servers, again, this is not specific. We're going to talk a little bit about Windows servers, a little bit about Linux servers. We're going to mention that there's Mac servers out there, but we're not going to focus on those. This class is going to just be the overall idea of what is a server, why is it useful, and what do you do with it if you have one. So give me a couple minutes. I'll be back and we'll get into this class. Now, the first thing that we have to do when we're talking about servers is we have to define what a server is. So a server is not simply, if it has server in the name, Windows 2008 server. That is a server, but that's not the only thing that can be a server. Basically, all a server is, this is nothing to be nervous about, all a server is it's a computer on a network that provides services to other computers on the network. So a file server is a computer on the network that has files in it that other people can get to. A print server on the network is a computer with a printer attached that can share out that printer to other computers on the network. So somebody can press print on one computer and it will print out on another computer. A web server is simply a computer with special software installed on it that allows that computer to present websites to people going to that computer. So all a server is a computer on the network that provides services to other computers. Now, this might be Windows 2008 server, Windows 2003 server, Ubuntu server, Red Hat Linux Enterprise Server Edition. It can be that. Or it can also be a Windows XP Home Edition computer that simply has a shared folder that everybody can access and grab files. So one of the big things that I want to get through your head is that all a server is a computer on the network that provides services to other computers on the network. Many people waste a lot of their own money and a lot of other people's money because when they go, oh, I need a file server, let's say they have a little office and they have 5 people in that office and they go, oh, I need a file server. Well, they run out and they spend $4,000 on an enterprise class Windows 2008 server. And they can now share out the files to everybody in the office. And they go, wow, bonus, I now have a file server. Well, they did not need a full Windows 2008 server in order to share out a few files on the network. They could have used, like I say, Windows XP Home Edition to share out files on the network, and it would have been a lot less expensive. So the main thing when we define server is that to be a server, the computer doesn't have to have server in the name of the operating system. All the computer does to have to be a server is it has to provide services to other computers on the network. So now that we've defined what a server is, so a server is a computer on the network that provides services to clients on the network. We have to kind of differentiate between servers and servers. What do I mean by that? Well, in the real world, you basically have two different types of servers. You have the little file server sitting in an office with 5 people that people either back up files to or they get something off of every once in a while. It is a server, it is useful, people share information, but if the server crashes or something goes a little hinky, nobody's really going to lose their mind over it. Nobody's going to get fired over it. Then you have servers. Servers, real servers, are computers that have to be on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and if they stop functioning ever, for any reason, everything just goes to absolute hell. Like with this company, everymanit.com. Our web servers, our media servers, have to be online 24 hours a day. They rarely even get rebooted. They get rebooted maybe once a month. More likely once every 2 or 3 months. These things have to be rock solid, stable. If anything happens, they have to be able to survive small problems. So if there's a small problem in the operating system or the hardware, they have to be able to survive that and keep going, because if something fails, well, then the entire business just goes away. So we've defined server as providing services for clients on the network. But then what you have to think about is you do have two very, very different types of servers. You have the server, like I say, that deals with 5 people in an office. It has a printer connected to it. It has some shared files. You know, again, if it dies, it's sad. You know, we shed a tear or whatever, but nobody's going to lose their job over it. Versus servers. These are the really cool things that everybody wants to work on. Servers, they have to be up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And so when most people talk about servers, when you discuss servers with most people, these are the types of servers that they're going to be talking about. They're going to be talking about rock solid pieces of equipment that basically should never fail. So just keep that in mind. There are two different types of servers in the world, and we're going to go into that in these next 2 sections when we talk about server operating systems and then server hardware. So let's take a moment to talk about server operating systems. As we said before, the little Windows XP home computer can be a server. But the issue with that little XP home computer is it's not designed to be on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, to never be rebooted, to never really need repairs. It's built to be a little computer you can either do some word processing or play video games on. Well, Microsoft and all the other companies out there, on top of creating desktop operating systems, they also create server operating systems. Server operating systems are more robust, more stable, and generally more secure than the desktop operating systems. So if you're thinking, why don't I use that Windows XP home computer, because that's going to be a lot less expensive than buying a full-fledged Windows 2008 server. It really depends on what you need that server for. If you need to share files to 5 or 10 people in an office, a little Windows XP computer would be fine for you. Windows 2008 servers, or any servers, whether they're Linux or Mac OS, actually has a full server. They are made to be much more robust and to deal with many more incoming connections than the little home desktop computers. Imagine and realize that real server operating systems, like if you're dealing with Windows 2008 server and you're using it for what's called an Active Directory server, so people actually log into it and they gain resources to the network, one single Windows 2008 server can support up to 10,000 users. So that server software is much more robust and can deal with far more users and far more issues than the little desktop operating system will. So the reason people use the server operating systems versus the desktop operating systems is, again, they can scale up. They can deal with far more users than a desktop computer can. One of the things you have to realize when you're dealing with server operating systems is a lot of times they can seem much more complicated than desktop computers because they actually don't come with as many of the nice little friendly user tools that desktop computers come with. Since you're new with servers, something to think about is that every time you put a piece of software or put a piece of functionality onto a computer, into the operating system, not only do you get that extra functionality, but you also get possible extra flaws, bugs, and defects that hackers can use to compromise that system. So when you install Flash onto your computer, you like it because you can watch videos. You can watch this video because you have Flash installed. But that Flash actually has security holes that hackers can use to take over the computer. So when the vendors create server operating systems, they don't put in as many of those nice little features into the server operating systems because they want to make the server operating systems more secure. So if you're dealing with a Windows 2008 server, when you go into it, you're going to notice that it's much more difficult to get around and administer that server than it is a normal Windows desktop computer, because there's not as many nice, fancy, little flashy wizards and easy to do stuff. If you use Linux, like if you decide to use Ubuntu Linux as a server, you'll notice if you download and install the desktop version of Ubuntu Linux, you get a nice little graphical interface. You can go in, you can left click, you can right click, and you can do all the stuff that you think of when you use a computer. If you download the server software, after it reboots, you're going to be seeing something that looks like a DOS prompt. And there's just going to be a little cursor that's blinking at you. And it will only do whatever it is you type into it to tell it to do. So why they do that is because all those fancy little graphics that make the server easier to use also create security holes. So if you want a very secure Linux web server, you don't want all the graphical stuff. You don't want Firefox installed. You don't even want the GUI. You don't want cursors and buttons and all of that. You just want that little DOS prompt, so you can type in and tell it exactly what you want it to do, and that's all it will do. So when you're dealing with the server operating systems, although in many ways they can be much more sophisticated, or are much more sophisticated than the desktop computers, they're not necessarily as user-friendly. So you really have to understand what you're doing before you start going in there and start to mess with stuff. Because if you do something stupid, it can be much more difficult to get back to where you came from. The last part, when you're dealing with server software, so we've talked about the server operating systems. Server operating systems, when you go to buy software, let's say backup software or utility software, one thing to realize, to know, is that software is going to be much more expensive than the normal comparable desktop versions. So when I had the repair shop, we used Acronis for our backup solution, whether it was desktop computers or servers. Well, the Acronis for a desktop computer was anywhere between $50 to $100, depending on what edition we bought. The backup software for the servers that we installed, it seems like it's the exact same thing, but for whatever reason, that was $600 to $700. So this is something to realize when you're deciding between using a desktop operating system as a server or a server operating system as a server, is the software for that server operating system is going to be more expensive. Again, we used disk management, it's partitioning software to enlarge or shrink partitions. On a desktop computer, it cost $50. For a server, it cost $600. Basically the same functionality. One was for a server, one was for a desktop computer. 10 times the cost. So we've kind of talked about the server operating systems. Remember, any computer that provides a service on the network is technically a server. But then you have two types of servers. The server, that supports 5 users, it's a little computer, has a couple files on it, has a printer, and the servers support up to 10,000 users at a time, are much more robust, are expected to never be rebooted, etc. When you're looking to install a server for yourself or your client, really think about what you need, because again, like I say, that little Windows XP computer is fine for 5 people and is very inexpensive. The server, the Windows 2008 server, is very robust, but very expensive. Like I say, even the backup software was $600, just for one piece of software. So that's a brief introduction on on what server operating systems are. Now let's go into, and we're going to talk about server hardware. So we just talked about server operating systems. So server operating systems, Windows 2008 Server, Ubuntu Server Edition, anything like that, those are operating systems that are built to be on servers that are going to be very robust, very tough, more secure, etc. Well, the same is true of server hardware. So you can use any hardware to create a server. You can go out to Best Buy and you can buy the crappiest little e-machine. You can throw it on the network and you can share out files, and you can use that fine as a file server or whatever type of server you need. You don't need specialized hardware for servers. But just like with the server operating systems, they do make special hardware for servers, and if you need your server to be up 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, etc., you should really think about using real server hardware. The first piece of server hardware that you probably know is server processors. So in Intel, these are called Xeon processors. Basically, the reason you want to use a Xeon processor is that processor is built for dealing with the tasks that servers normally deal with. So if you want a really fast video game machine, right now you probably buy an Intel i7 quad-core processor, and that is built for video games. That will be very good for video games. Well, what you need in a server computer is not the same as what you need in a video game computer. So you would go out and you would buy a Xeon processor. These processors they're very good at just chugging through and just dealing with data and doing the stuff that servers do. So the first thing is the Xeon processor. Again, you don't need it, but it is better if you're using a server. The next thing when you're dealing with a server is something called redundant power supplies. So what the redundant power supplies are is within the normal form factor for a power supply, they can fit anywhere between 2 to 3 power supplies in there. And so if one of the power supplies fails, the other 2 are still active and the computer stays on. So imagine if dust gets blown in or just a capacitor blows out, any of the normal stuff. If one of those power supplies dies, the computer is still on. It's completely still functional. Most of these redundant power supplies are hot swappable, so you can actually, if one of those the redundant power supplies fails, you can pull it out, you can order a new one and just plug it in and go on your way. You do not have to reboot the system. That's hot swappable. Now again, almost all of these redundant power supplies allow you to hot swap the different power modules, and normally you can have anywhere between 2 to 3 modules. So you can have up to basically 2 power supplies fail. So that's what the redundant power supplies do, is they allow one power supply to fail, but the computer stays on. With the power supplies, in most servers, you will also hear of something called RAID. RAID is Redundant Array of Inexpensive Disks. We actually have a whole class on RAID. It's called Intro to RAID, if you want to take a look at it. Basically, what RAID does is it allows you to combine multiple physical disks into one logical disk. So most of the time, if you have a server, you will either have something called disk striping with parity or disk mirroring. Disk mirroring is where you have 2 hard drives in the machine that are identical. So one piece of data gets put on one piece of data gets put on the other. Another piece of data gets put on one, another piece of data gets put on the other. If one of these hard drives fails, the computer stays running because you have 2 identical hard drives. These hard drives are, again, what is called hot swappable. So if one hard drive fails, you pull out the drive that failed, you plug in a brand new hard drive. It does something, the computer does something called, it rebuilds the array, and then you go back to being redundant. So if one hard drive fails, the computer stays up, you pull out the bad hard drive, you put the new hard drive in, everything stays running. You never turn